It's the 6th of January, 1943, and the Oak Bay Detachment is beginning to set sail from Rabaul to Lae so they can move to Salamaua and then prepare for an attack against the Australian commandos who have been engaging in guerrilla warfare for some time now. On the other hand, the Allies have somewhat of an understanding of Japanese movements in Rabaul, as they know they will be heading towards Lae, but are unsure of what the Japanese might do next. So, General Thomas Blarney, who oversaw the area, decides to deploy the veteran 17th Infantry Brigade from Milne Bay to Wau in order to support the commandos at Wau. This force located at Wau is labeled the Kanga Force and would be responsible for defending Wau if Oak Bay's detachment was to attack Wau. However, both sides would come to experience the harsh terrain that Papua New Guinea has to offer, with the inability for planes to fly, which meant that transporting the entirety of the 17th Infantry Brigade would take significant time due to low clouds and unfavorable weather for flying. And for Oak Bay, he soon would come to find that traveling through Papua New Guinea on foot will be very difficult, and movement would be slowed down significantly. This means that both sides were in a race against time, as Oak Bay must reach Wau before the 17th Infantry Brigade arrives, and the Kanga Force must hope that the 17th Infantry Brigade arrives before Oak Bay's likely arrival. Oak Bay's naval convoy would be attacked numerous times by Allied aircraft, including the United States Army Air Forces and the Royal Australian Air Force. Most notably, an attack took place at night by the Royal Australian Air Force under the command of Flight Lieutenant David Vernon. This attack would sink a ship from the convoy, with only 739 troops being rescued out of the 1,100 troops on board. Eventually, Oak Bay's naval convoy finally reaches Lae with his 4,000-sized unit and affected little by Allied sorties. He then advances towards Salamaua and prepares his plans to attack the Australian military base at Wau Airport. Interestingly, Oak Bay had two possible directions to attack from when arriving at Lae. Firstly, he had the ability to go down to Bololo Valley. This track wouldn't be difficult and would allow for easier movement, but it would leave Oak Bay exposed to Allied aircraft. The second option was to move to Salamaua and then go through the Black Cat track. This track was difficult, and even though it was a shorter travel with only around 40 kilometers in comparison to 110 kilometers for the first option, the high mountains weren't very kind to travelers. Nevertheless, Oak Bay decides to take the latter option and cross the treacherous Black Cat track. Now, if you haven't already, be sure to like our page, as it will help build awareness and it will let us know that you'd like to see more of this content. It helps a lot. On January 16th, Oak Bay's forces were finally all inside Salamaua and eventually made their way outside Salamaua toward the Black Cat track. At this time, Murray Moten, who oversaw Kanga Force, moved his forces into position both inside and around the Black Cat track. Two platoons were based at the Black Cat mine, whilst Rifle Company was placed in defensive positions further away from the Black Cat track. On January 20th, a small Australian patrol that was scouting further down the Black Cat track noticed Japanese forces moving through the track. Both the Japanese and Australians did not engage one another, but now Kanga Force knew for certain that the Japanese were advancing through their track and heading straight towards the Australian deployed at the Black Cat mine. Or so they thought. On January 24th, Australian patrols began to realize that Oak Bay had decided to go down a very old track which was deemed by the Australians as the Jap track. This track meant that Oak Bay could conceal the total amount of forces he has and take the Australians by surprise. However, Kanga Force realized that the Japanese had placed themselves in a vulnerable position, as those at the Black Cat mine would be able to conduct an attack on Oak Bay's flank. But on January 28th at 4 a.m., the Japanese launched an all-out attack on A Company at the village of Wandumi. This meant that the Japanese had outmaneuvered the Australians. This all-out frontal assault on Wandumi was intense, as mortar fire rained down upon Rifle Company A, whilst also being met with charging Japanese soldiers. For most of the morning and into the afternoon, the Australians and Japanese were fighting ferociously. But the Japanese soon realized their mass frontal assaults were proving ineffective, as the Australians were able to hold back the assault with accurate rifle fire. So Oakbay decided to change his tactics and instead decided to use infiltration tactics by sending his soldiers to sneak up close to the Australians and catch them by surprise. At 3:30 p.m., the Japanese had successfully infiltrated the Australian lines and began to open fire on the Australians. The confusion almost caused Company A to collapse as several men were killed upon the infiltrated attack. At this moment, it seemed that all hope for Company A had gone as chaos spread through the company. But when everything looked bleak, the company leader, Captain Sherlock, took it upon himself to launch a bayonet charge with a few commandos and other soldiers from his HQ. This last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation worked, as the charging Aussies were a fearful sight to behold. Immediately after, Australians were continuing to hold their positions firmly, but by 6 p.m., ammunition was running low, and a significant number of Japanese soldiers were making their way down the track to reinforce the assault. So Rifle Company A began to retreat to Wau Airport, whilst the other company and the 2 platoons at the Black Cat track also followed suit to Wau Airport in order to not get cut off by the advancing Japanese forces. While this battle may have seemed to be in vain, as Japanese forces are now marching their way to Wau Airport and the Australians in retreat, it actually worked in Australia's favor, as holding back the Japanese along the Jap track allowed for the weather to become clearer, and thereby allowing the remaining 17th Infantry Brigade to be transported quickly to Wau Airport during the early hours of the 29th, just a day after holding back the Japanese. These American pilots from the 374th Troop Carrier Group overflew the airport 60 times on that day through enemy fire and dangerous terrain in order to reinforce the Australians. Now, with the 17th Infantry Brigade at Wau Airport, defenses can be prepared against the incoming Japanese. However, that will have to wait for the next episode. And once again, if you've enjoyed our content, be sure to leave a like on our video and like on our page to see the next episode and future content.